A very good evening to all the distinguished faculty members, guests, and my fellow students. Before I begin, may I request everyone to please turn off their microphones. Thank you. Once again, the Department of English and Humanities of ULAB is back with its most exciting segment of the tri-semester, known as the Curriculum Integration Program Spring 2021. And today is the second forum of the following program. As the guest speaker, we are truly honored to have with us today the Bangladeshi critic and writer, Professor Syed Manzoorul Islam, who has been a witness to many of the most significant events during the emergence of Bangladesh. I thank Professor Syed Manzoorul Islam for being with us today. To celebrate 50 years of Bangladesh's independence, our chosen theme for this term is 50 years of Bangladesh's independence, language, literature, and culture. This topic will address different aspects of our country, such as culture, education, language, literature, technology, and policymaking. Through our curriculum integration, our goal in this tri-semester would be to gain a better understanding of our beloved nation and what steps we should take to uphold the legacy of our hard-earned independence. Now, at this point, I'd like to invite the head of the Department of English and Humanities, ULAB, Ms. Arifa Ghani Rahman, to deliver the welcome speech. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shahriar. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Let me begin by welcoming our Pro-Vice Chancellor and Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, Professor Shamshat Mortaza, our respected Professor, Professor Kaisar Haq, our colleagues, students, and of course, our speaker for this evening, our respected Professor, renowned writer and critic, Professor Syed Manzoorul Islam, your teacher, my teacher. As you all know, so 2021 marks the 50th year of the independence of Bangladesh. And in the last 50 years, there have been many changes in the forms and usage of literature, language, and culture of the country. And this is certainly a good time to look back at them closely. So for the fourth time now in spring 2021, the Department of English and Humanities is holding its curriculum integration program. And appropriately, the chosen theme is 50 years of Bangladesh's independence, language, literature, and culture. So just to sort of give a little bit of a background and overview of what we are doing with this, because I believe we do have some of our new students in the department. So just to sort of familiarize them with it, I'm just going to give a little overview of the whole thing. So for the curriculum integration program each semester, the department chooses a relevant and significant theme. And students in different courses are expected to relate some aspect of their course materials or learning to this overarching theme. So this kind of integration allows students to creatively express their understanding of the course materials while making connections with real world issues or ideas. So typically we hold two forums with invited speakers who provide an overview of the theme as well as ways in which the connections can be made. So in the first forum, we had Professor Rafiqul Islam sir giving us an overview of the theme. And today we have our Manzoor sir to continue that in the second forum. So in the curriculum integration program, after the forums, the course teachers guide the students towards finding ways of expression as well as specific connections to their subject matter. So for instance, for the chosen theme this semester, the focus is on nation, nationalism, national identity in relation to our language, literature, and culture. So those in my novel course, for instance, may decide to make a connection between Okonkwo and Things Fall Apart and his zeal for upholding the values of his tribe with the freedom fighters of the Liberation War. The students from the poetry courses may consider a project to digitally trace and record expressions of nation, nationalism, and national identity in the poetry of Bangladesh over the last 50 years. The use of Bangla, English, and other Bangladeshi languages like Chakma, Marma, Tripura, etc. in different domains, particularly in media and education sectors of this country, can be examined. These Bangladeshi languages can also be studied from language learning and acquisition perspectives. So these and other creative ideas can help us understand or examine our own ideas about nation and national identity. So with that, let me hand over the floor to you, Shahriar, and thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful words. And now, may I invite Professor Shamshad Murtuza, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of ULAB and the Dean of School of Arts and Humanities, to put the topic in context and introduce our honorable speaker. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Syed. I think Arifa has done a fine job, and I don't need to, repeat what has already been said. So the curriculum integration is about integrating your curriculum, right? So whatever is being taught in your classroom, so you learn to apply them. So it's the application aspect of our curriculum. So it's a rare privilege and honor to introduce my fellow Capricorn, my teacher that I didn't have, but is someone really that I look up to. And I'm really honored to be his colleague, both at Dhaka University and at ULAB. So my job is pretty simple. Sometimes we take things for granted. We say that, so-and-so does not need any introduction. But I think, Monju sir is an institution that we should all be proud of, just like Kaisa sir here. So we also have Professor Rafiqul Islam, Professor Abdul Mannan, so and others. So at ULAB, we should be proud of all these figureheads. So in order to do, or in order to appreciate these luminaries, it's important that we know a little bit more about them. So I'm going to read out the brief bio that I have in front of me. Syed Manzoorul Islam is one of Bangladesh's foremost fiction writers, as well as a preeminent academic, translator, columnist, and literary and art critic. As the incumbent elected president of PEN Bangladesh, since 2018, he's a public intellectual who plays an increasingly important role in the national and cultural events. After teaching at his alma mater, the University of Dhaka, for 42 years, he joined the University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh as a distinguished professor of English. Fondly known as SMI to his students, he was born in the city of Sylhet to Syed Amirul Islam and Rabia Khatun on January 18, 1951. He passed the entrance examination from Sylhet Government Pilot High School in 1966 and intermediate examination from Sylhet MC College in 1968. He received his graduate and postgraduate degrees from the University of Dhaka, respectively in 1971 and 1972. Later, he went to Canada and earned his PhD from Queen's University, Kingston in 1981. His dissertation, titled Immanuel Swedenborg's Influence on the Poetry of William Butler Yeats, was supervised by Professor Norman Mackenzie. In 1989, he went to the University of Southern Mississippi, as a Fulbright scholar and taught there one semester. Dr. Islam's areas of special interests include Shakespeare, modern poetry, fiction, literary theory, postmodernism and postcolonialism, and translatology. He's also a noted column writer and a contributor to leading Bangla dailies such as Prothom Alo and Shomokal, and writes on political and social issues. He's also an occasional political analyst for the BBC. Professor Islam was a member of the jury of Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 1989, Eurasia region, and is a jury for the 2008 Asian Art Biennale in Dhaka. In 1996, he received Bangla Academy Literary Award, and while in 2005, his short stories collection, Prem O Prarthanar Golpo, was adjudged by the National Daily Prothom Alo as the Book of the Year, and by the literary journal Kagoj for its Sahitya Award. I can go on and on, especially about his fiction. So he is one of the exponents of magic realism in Bangla fiction, and his work has been translated. And so without further ado, I would like to hand over to Monju sir for his reflection and thoughts on today's program.
Thank you, Shamshad. I was thinking your introduction would be longer than my speech. All right.
So you can tell I'm doing the encyclopedia entry on you.
No, thank you very much. I know that, but students don't need to know so much. But the most important thing you have said is that you really have to pursue a kind of a passion. So for all of us, Kaiser, me and you, and the Arif and others, teaching is a passion, isn't it? And when talking to the students, it should not be only driven by the need to have a certificate in hand so that you can enter the marketplace. That's not what defines a learner. You must have the passion. If you don't have the passion, you cannot really look at things from different perspectives. You are only taking an academics perspective, which is sometimes incorrect. So I urge all of you to cultivate your sense of critique for anything that goes around, not simply literature, but things happening in society. Arifa introduced beautifully the whole idea of CI Forum. It's an interactive forum, basically, in which you participate to cast the net far wide, so to say, so that you have ideas and insights along the way, which you can apply in everything in life. So that's what literature is all about. It's not simply confined to books and the practices of writers. It is something that touches on life, because literature derives from the core, hardcore existence of humanity, rooted in reality. And then with that reality, you can play around. Magic realism is uh, a construction of imaginative opening up of another parallel universe. And don't you live in parallel universes? Our politicians always live in a parallel universe, which is not the real universe we live in. So that shows you how CI Forum can energize you in becoming a better student of literature. Today's topic is Bangladesh's Shadhinotar 50 বছর, right? That's a general frame that we are talking about. It's a very vast topic, isn't it? Because in 50 years, we have done so much. If you look at the history of the last 50 years, it really cross-cuts a range of areas of engagement. It's not simply economy or the external trade or education or economy, which got a beating in the pandemic, but then rose again almost from ashes to claim new grounds, or infrastructure development, but it's also about the social practices that happened during all this time. Is, for example, the lack of or absence of a functioning democratic culture. Why didn't it grow? The yawning disparities between the rich and the poor, the marginalized and the elite, the privileged. Why this is threatening to grow wider. That also is an area of investigation if you are talking of the last 50 years. We have our achievements, but we also have our failures. You just cannot put everything, sweep everything under the carpet. You have to confront your failures, your limitations. Have we addressed the issue of minority security, for example, the identity issue? Do the minorities feel that their identity has been secured in our country? What about cultural hybridization that happens almost every day around you? What about the environmental problems? And the list goes on and on. So you have to engage with all these issues which face you from a day-to-day basis. But to understand all these piecemeal is a very difficult process. You can talk about economy, go on, and you can write volumes on economic achievements and failures. You can write volumes on disparities in different fields. For example, the pandemic has given us new definitions of disparities. What about nationalism, which is a very important issue for Bangladeshis? And if you compare nationalism with vaccine nationalism, which is a newfangled term that we hear of, you see the operation of a colonial frame everywhere in the world. And just as the colonialists ruled over 2/3 of the world, they also fought against each other. The Spanish and the French and the English were at each other's throats. And today, you see, at today's news, I'm giving very, very breaking news. European Union is having a huge fight with the British over vaccines. European Union is threatening to ban export of their vaccines to Britain. Colonialists fought among themselves. and now they are fighting among themselves, although they are not colonialists in the older sense of the term, but who doesn't know about the new forms of colonialism? And you must also see this is operating in our country. That's the reason when you look at the whole history of Bangladesh, you need a theoretical frame. Uh, why do you need a theoretical frame? Because theory gives you the idea of a discipline. You can organize your thoughts around certain core ideas, which remain more or less the same, even if you change the subject. For example, if you look at politics through the lens of post-colonialism, you have one kind of understanding of society, of institutions which function or do not function. If you look at health system through the same post-colonial frame, you will have a different field, but the same more or less insights and ideas. You will see the same kinds of failures of institutions. So the frame gives you an understanding of the core ideas which you organize and shape according to whatever you are going to present. And post-colonial theory in this case helps you, because it's not only that you are reading this post-colonial thing. I take classes, this semester I'm taking 2 post-colonial classes. So I'm very fresh in my mind about the post-colonial ideas that are circulating around. But I'm sure that even if you are not a literature student, you encounter the same problems everywhere in your life. I'll talk about these things. Just a few things before I go into discussing last 50 years history in post-colonial terms. I'll explain what post-colonialism is very briefly, and then I'll go into it. But it also helps you to make meaning of things which threaten to be almost intractable. Sometimes you struggle with an expressive content and a style that is not straying apart, very far from what you intend to. So a theoretical frame helps you not only to organize your thoughts and ideas, but also express them with some amount of clarity and share your ideas in a way that the ground is even. The people that you are talking to can understand you, and you can understand the people. So the barriers of abstraction are removed. The barriers of incomprehensibility, these are also removed. Things become more comprehensible, more understandable, and explainable if you take a theoretical perspective. That's what we are going to take today. And if you look at the large number of post-colonial ideas emerging and also theories emerging, you will see that history has been considered through post-colonial theories. So you have a kind of history emerging in the 1980s called subaltern historiography, which is so different from the nationalist historiography, which only talked about power and institutions which are visible. How about the grassroots people who also write history? Who tells you that subalterns cannot speak? The question is not if the subalterns cannot speak. The question is whether you can understand their language. They are not speaking in your language because your language is alien to them. Their language you have to understand. The question is they speak. Is the subaltern can speak, but can you hear them? That's a big question. So it's a change of perspective. Instead of history becoming a top-down approach, and in top-down approach, you will have generalizations, which will miss the point at the grassroots. History is something that you take a bottom-up view. So the grassroots first, the base, then you rise to the top of the pyramid. This inverted idea of history is so important to understand the social energy that goes around. What about ethnographers and anthropologists who are taking a post-structuralist view of society? They're not looking at the systems and structures. They're looking at the components, how these are formed. And then it becomes so versatile that you can really relate to even the smallest of details in a very comfortable way. What about post-colonial feminism? You have had Rokeya Sakawat Hussein's Sultana's dream, right? She took it, there is a double irony involved here. She is attacking not only patriarchy, but also colonialism, which is also a bigger form of patriarchy. What is she doing? She is taking science as the most important weapon in empowering women. Science, which is very male and very against women. Science does not include women. Science is very male. Science is very heavy investment area, aligns with capitalism. Willy-nilly, science also from the Renaissance aligned with colonization. And she is taking science as a ground of remaking her women, empowering them. She doesn't empower them, women empower themselves through the cultivation of the same science which the male establishment had used to disempower women. See how she turns the tables. What am I talking about is read literature. Literatures contain those insights which post-colonialists somehow have gathered around and given voice to the subalterns who can not only speak, but can also be have to be listened to. Post-colonialism is what is post-colonialism. The problematic thing is the post. We realize that when you have the idea of a post, it usually suggests a time which is after. It's like something like post-operative care happens after the operation has been over. But the post in post-colonialism, as in postmodernism, is something that goes parallel with something that it posts. For example, modernism and postmodernism run parallel. Why? Because postmodernism investigates, questions, challenges, critiques the excesses of modernism, the so-called grand narratives, and the whole association of modernism with male authority, patriarchy, institutions, capitalism, colonialism. You cannot really go on. You can go on and find the problems with modernism. Postmodernism makes fun of these, but at the same time presents you alternatives. The same thing happens with post-colonialism. It has a very close relationship with colonialism because it looks at colonialism, finds problems with colonialism, the gaps it leaves behind, and the ideologies which it flouts, and then questions them, critiques them, and investigates them, and provides new meanings about things which you do not look at. Like Orientalism of Edward Syed, when it came, people realized how the West has always looked at the East through its own lenses and described the East as what West is not. All the negativity is connected with what the West is not. And that kind of identity formation, that kind of subject formation goes on with colonialism. Why am I telling you that post-colonial approaches are important? Because while post-colonialism understands colonialism, it also shows you the limitations and excesses of colonialism, not simply the application of brute power and suppression of rights, but more subtle things. For example, destruction of environment, the uprooting of your cultural roots, how it tries to uh, silence the majority. And when the majority is silenced, what is the role of the minority? Post-colonialism investigates colonialism's majoritarian ethics. Why is it that the powerful and the mighty will always rule? And you examine the power and knowledge nexus, because Foucault has told you that where there is power, there is the application of knowledge to gain more power and consolidate power. All these things are important for you to understand the 50-year history of Bangladesh and the benefits of taking this post-colonial approach. You can also take many other approaches. You can take a magic realist approach. There's no problem there. You can take a postmodernist approach, no problem there, because wherever culture is involved, you can take a postmodernist look, no problem there. But I believe that reading the history of Bangladesh for the last 50 years will be very helpful for you if you take a post-colonial theoretical approach. Number one, it helps you, as I said, to critique many of the excesses that we have seen in the last 50 years, the remnants of colonialism which operate even today. You can also reconstruct your own version of history if you want to, like subaltern historiography constructed a new version of history, which looked at the failures of traditional academic nationalist history in addressing everyone on the same page. It looks at the ideologies and practices of colonialist past, and then how these ideologies and practices are still being followed in our time. Um, it helps you to counter the universalism of colonialism, which denies the individuals their rights. And so nothing local is seen to flourish. You have the suppression of the local culture, local languages, local aspirations. Why is homeopathy suppressed in favor of, say, allopathy? It's not simply that homeopathy or herbal medicine are inadequate to address modern day scientific, science-based, the problems of medicine and health, which only a science-based approach can solve. We realize that. But isn't it that the local can always threaten the global? If the global doesn't have wide access to the local market, the gains or the profits of producing all the medicine would not pile up in your banks. And if you can suppress all local practices, there is some kind of universalism, call it McDonaldization or Coca-Colaization. You have many newfangled names for it. But ultimately, the idea is if the local is suppressed, the global takes over. And global is controlled not by you, but by those who control your lives through remote control buttons. Colonialism is now operating through remote control buttons. So you are not sure who is the face behind the mask. I'm not talking simply of the pandemic enforced mask, the mask of conquest. Gauri Vishwanathan has given you a title there. It helps you understand the new application of Orientalism. Don't you see the self-other binary, which is one of the important binaries promoted by colonialism, operating in our country? Do the ethnic minorities have rights to use their mother language in institutions which they belong to? If their mother language is not accepted in your institutions of learning, then we cannot say they have an even playing field. If the minorities even today have to run for their lives, stalked by um, groups who have no respect for your rights, then what kind of a social setup we have made? What about grand narratives? We also hear of, remember, there's a caveat. I'm giving you a warning like it is written on the packet of cigarettes, smoking kills. My caveat is I'm not giving a political lecture. So please don't quote me from this lecture. I'm not giving a political one. My idea is bigger than the incidents of politics. I'm taking a post-colonial approach, which is not particularly concerned about one country's politics, but looks at the whole generalization of things in the name of politics. So please keep this in mind. For example, the grand narrative of development that we are hearing today, Unnayan, right? But have you thought about how Unnayan hides the disparities which are so stark? Do the poor have the same rights as the rich in this Unnayan frame? Within the frame of development, have you included all the women from the remote, inaccessible regions of this country? If there are gaps and disparities, then the problem becomes an acute um, uh, ignorance of the people who control your lives about what the grassroots think about. We also, and we are used to seeing people paying lip service to all these things. Lip services are rhetorical approaches of politicians. They don't really, at the end of the day, translate into gains for the ordinary people. So what are the problems that confront you? Um, we have systems of representation, for example. Post-colonial theory re-examines the colonial representation. Representation of women, minorities for one thing, representation of the environment that you have, for example, the difference between village and the center. How is the village treated in a colonial frame? Rabindranath Tagore lamented the disappearance of the villages, which were the epicenters of people, of communities. Around a village, the community developed its existence. And after colonization happened, you have the enforcement of the rule of the center. The villages were disabled, and to the extent that the center was enabled to rule over the whole territory called of the subcontinent. So the disappearance of the village created a whole lot of problems. When the city emerged as the center of power, the city did not include even the migrants from the village. They were shifted to the margins of the city in the slums and other areas. A permanent disconnect between groups of people took place when the villages disappeared. It's not that the cities existed before, but the relationship between the cities and the villages was symbiotic. The villages supplied the food and other necessities to the city, jobs and everything. Disparities had always been there, but it's not that they were denied, the villages were denied their rights to organize themselves and conduct themselves. With colonization, the cities assumed the power and the villages in proportion lost their power. As a result, poverty increased, illiteracy increased. The local systems were all rooted out. And imagine Rabindranath Tagore laments the fact that the villages had schools or tolls or maktabs. They had their own paniyo jal or drinking water supply. People took care of each other. Even in poverty, there was a kind of support system available for the families. So the systems of representation had changed. What about environment? It has taken such a big beating. Unnayan doesn't, the development that we have today doesn't care about environment. Because if it cares about environment, it will not be achieving the optimum growth. For optimization of growth, you need to have a system operating which doesn't care for individual differences or individual local demands of protection and also support. So you have to be ruthless in a sense. You know about the operation of the capital market. It doesn't care about whether poor person is dying in need of medicine and others, but it operates without any mercy or a moment of thought for the poor. So if you understand the techniques of colonization, the reason I'm talking about colonization is that we have fought to be colonial powers. That's the history of the subcontinent. 3 or 4 other countries have fought only one. Sri Lanka became independent in 1948. They have since been independent. Pakistan did not have to fight another colonial war, neither did India. We only were the only country which had 2 battles, which were mostly fought against 2 colonialist powers. So we have been tested twice over, so to say. And we know that, and we know about the dangers of colonialism straight away from our own experience. I lived through the Pakistani rule. I understand how this colonial system operated in Pakistan. How, for example, the techniques of colonization were in operation. Hegemony and control, for example. Erasure of identity. The language movement was an attempt to restore our linguistic right, along with it, our cultural identity. It remained an ongoing battle until 1971. What about the erasure of private space? When the police comes to your house, arrests you at the deep of night, and then your home is no longer protected. You have lost your private space. And that is one of the significant losses during colonialism. Your private space is no longer protected. I'll give you an example of how has been done in colonialism everywhere. You have Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, TFA, I call this, because everyone has read that. Look at how Okonkwo becomes so disoriented because his private space is gone. His son has been claimed by a system he doesn't understand. His family has been totally disrupted by a system he doesn't understand. So his most sacred place, his home, has been overruled by alien systems. That is something so heartbreaking in a colonial system. And the communal get-togetherness, for example, it's not that Hindus and Muslims always had very friendly relations in the subcontinent, but at least incidents of large-scale riots, something like that happened in 1947, never had happened in the history of India. Systematic massacres of each other. Hindus killing Muslims by the thousands and Muslims killing Hindus by the thousands. And when children are included in this, when rape is used as a weapon of war, it changes everything. That never happened in the past, but this has increasingly been done by the British and also mostly by the Pakistanis during the 1971. That one factor alone will tell you the brutalities, the brute matter of colonialism, when weapon and women are used to um, to sort of destroy a community's pride. Um, this approach will also help you to um, open pathways of different identities. Like if you understand colonialism, you understand the need to protect yourself, how women should protect themselves or their identities through their self-empowerment, which can only come through education. And Rokea's story is a case in point. Women scientists taking up the battle and winning the battle without really killing anyone. But the power of their scientific imagination is not simply the fact of science, but also imagination of science, which accompanies any true scientific project. Unless you have an imagination, science becomes a weapon of destruction. The atom bomb was cultivated without any imagination. It was purely a weapon of destruction. It was devoid of the sense of imagination that it should accompany something. When you, for example, when Wright brothers invented the machine, flying machine, they had an imagination. And you can see the same imagination operating in Rokea's story, where the air car, which is a cross between a helicopter and a balloon, it suddenly becomes the most important vehicle. It has taken away the need to pave the roads. It's a story which shows you how environment can be protected even by the application of science. And these are the ideas that you can find. And the last thing that you can understand through your reading of postcolonial theory is what Frantz Fanon said, the need to decolonize your mind. Colonization happens in many places. Your body is colonized. The loss of the body, the sheer corporeality, is an important loss in colonialism. You have seen how Caliban is described thoroughly in bodily terms. His body becomes the most important item of identity. He is a monster. He is now a fish. He is now a cross between a fish and whatever, a beast. And so what Prospero does is attack his body. But then he stands up and fights. And then he wants to take revenge on the girl by defiling her body. So it becomes a body game. And then you realize how prisoners in colonial systems are treated and how women are raped in any war in 1971. Why? Because the destruction of the body is the ultimate loss of your identity. And how this can be recovered is important. Yeah, colonization of the body is one very important aspect of colonization. Colonization of your private space, yes, of course. Colonization of institutions, like the police system in our country still operates under the Act of 1861, imagine. And the act was fashioned after 1857 uprising, which very wrongly Indian historians describe as Sepoy mutiny, because a mutiny is something that the British introduced in the whole narrative, because a mutiny gives the power to the captains to put down the rebellion in very brutal terms, hang the sailors. Mutinies in ships, for example, the captain had the power to hang the sailors or throw their body into the sea, no questions asked. Mutiny, and then the punishment is justified. It was the first uprising of independence. And then the rules became very strict, absolute control, and the kind of panopticon at work, the big brother 24/7 vigilance that was also introduced. And we are still operating under 1861 Act. It is totally irrelevant to, not, irrelevant maybe is not the best word, is totally out of sync with a system which is operating in 2021. Uh, at the 50th year of celebration, we should not have a system of mind control, of controlling your expression in the most crudest, is the crudest possible ways. We should also be educated by the power of knowledge, enlightened. If you take Rokea's story, for example, empowered to function as fully formed individuals with a fully formed cultural sense, so that we do not use the social media space to vilify people, to promote ideologies which do not really have any constructive role in society. So the responsibilities lie everywhere. It's not simply the institutions of control which have to be changed, but people also have to be changed. If we want to have a democratically functioning society, the definition of democracy is important. If you do not believe in your independence, if a party doesn't believe in your independence, then that party is not democratic, because it's not taking the sentiments of a large number of people, and the history itself is being neglected. Now, it cannot be a functioning democracy in that particular setting. So these questions you can mind, but most importantly, remember the decolonization of the mind is important. If your mind is decolonized, all the powers of the institutions controlling you will be becoming weaker and weaker. Ultimately, you emerge as an empowered individual. So if you look back at 1947 and then you see the same things. The othering process at work, the self-other binary operating, and all kinds of like Orientalist definitional paradigms are applied to the people of the East. Now, East Pakistanis are swamp aboriginals. That's one of the descriptions. They are not a race of martial people. They cannot fight. When I was in school, the popular myth was 10 Bengalis equal to one Pathan. Now, that's the kind of myths were in circulation. The Orientalist thing, the Western people are more civilized because they are whiter in skin, fairer in skin. The Bengalis were fish-eating people, so no creativity involving the Bengalis. That's the kind of idea that you see circulating around, creating narratives or versions of colonialism which struck at the roots of your ethnic identities. That the whole of the um, Bengalis independence movement was fashioned by the Hindus. It not only shows the hatred for the Hindus and other minorities in the Pakistan state, it also shows you how their mindset was controlled by hatred, prejudice, and bias. Now, in an atmosphere where these are in overabundance, you just cannot function as independent citizens of independent country where your rights are protected. One of the things that you have seen in the colonial history is the over emphasis on violence. Uh, Colonization takes place through violence. Problems are resolved through violence. Instead of dialogues, instead of conversations, violence takes over as a source of strength of the colonizers as well as the solution to everything. And we have seen how this violence is applied in the Pakistani state day after day. Suppression of women, yes. Minorities, yes. And our fight was to claim our identity and agency. With identity comes agency. Without your agency, your identity is meaningless. You must have the power to refashion yourself, and refashion yourself, that's your personal empowerment, as well as your ability to do things as you like things to be done. Language and culture. We have seen how students fought one commission set up by, there were 8 commissions set during the Pakistani time. And none of these commission reports accepted the cultural diversities in the so-called Pakistan at the time. The education commissions did not give any space to the poor and the marginalized. It was driven by a central idea that you have to pay for your education. And so we also had to fight to reclaim our academic heritage, our educational ground, to reclaim our selfhood, not to be othered in a bracket as inferior, whatever Edward Syed has shown as the Eastern people were supposed to be towards the West, in the minds of the West, and our rights. But look at what happened after 1971, and that's the last part of your research and your understanding of the history. Have we traveled the right way? Have we taken the lessons from the post-colonial history of our twice to, told twice over? It's not that Bangladesh is the only country which is showing a lack. Look at India. It has not taken anything from the colonial history. Sri Lanka has not taken anything from colonial history. Neither has Myanmar. The same set of colonial attitude still persists in all these countries. But we are supposed to be a little different, right? And we should not allow our paths to be driven by the same colonialist energy that we have seen operating in 1947 to 1971. Have we really, do we abide by our constitution? We had a beautiful document, the constitution, which was so sort of liberal document, but then we have not really put the constitution ahead of everything. What about the persistence of colonialist structures? Have we got rid of the colonialist system of administration, judiciary, or even education? We have not. Have we been able to decolonize our minds? You see, when you are talking of post-colonial theory, it is not simply, the finger is not pointed at the institutions of power. It's also citizens' institutions, the individuals who constitute a state. So everyone has to be understood as responsible. If the institution is responsible, the individuals who constitute the institution also have to be responsible. Have we been able to pull up our resources together? Have we as citizens given our best performance? Have we taken our rights for granted, our rights as privileges? Or have you really struggled to get our rights right and our privileges forgotten? Have we been able to get out of our hegemonic structure of society? If you have a maid working in your house at half pay, don't expect anything to change at the state level. Your family is still persisting with a colonial paradigm. So if you cannot do your own work yourself, don't expect the government to do it for you. Are we free from our mental colonization? Do we look at others as others? Do we look at the minorities as ourselves? We look at ourselves. So do we see minorities as insignificant in terms of their numbers and everything? Aren't we also promoting hegemony? So what can we do now? The very last part of my lecture. I think you can take example from literatures that you have read. You have seen how Okonkwo just crumbles. A mighty man crumbles. And Okonkwo had also dysfunctionalities in his community. Why do you punish twins for no sin of their own? If you look at all the problems that Okonkwo had accumulated as a head of his seven village structure, then he also has to look at his own soul. Soul searching is important. Rokeya is a very strong case in front of us. Rokeya has told us that this is possible, but don't worry, I have given you just a dream. A dream is the ultimate irony. It is not real, it's a dream. But in the dream, something approaching the real has taken place, only more magical than real. But the gist of it, just take the gist of it and see how the women empowering themselves with science achieves the most impossible. If that is possible in the frame of a story, your responsibility is to translate the frame into real life. And I tell you, a story can resonate with your life, and your life can resonate with the lessons you have learned from a story. So that's my lecture. I'm sorry if it is a bit rambling. It's very difficult to make sense of something when you are speaking to a crowd which you don't see, and a space which is taken up by people who are not even responding to you. So if this lecture I would give, if I gave it in an auditorium with all your faces showing, I could read from your eyes if you were listening to me or everything was going over your head or you are losing interest, I would have really changed the discourse. But now I have been denied the freedom, but let's hope for the return of the new normal. And I'm sure the new normal will present you many problems to solve. And please begin from your own lives. If you can humanize the families, if you can humanize yourself to begin with your families, you will achieve a great success in changing your society. Don't expect everything to be given by the government. That's the colonial dependent system. When the villages were eliminated, everyone looked to the center, and not everyone could reach the center, so the disparities emerged. Those who had the capacity to go to the center became the surrogate rulers of the villages. So don't expect the government to deliver everything. Expect what you have done. Is it sufficient in terms of your abilities? If not, increase your abilities, gather your resources, deliver the most unexpected things that you can deliver, and then this achievement will be added to others' achievements, and together at the end you will achieve the most impossible, which is once again look at the story. Education, literature, science, your imagination, all empowering you to be better human beings. And if you are a better human being, you can always see things changing automatically. It's not because of the government development things it takes place. It is in spite of the government in many cases. But because of you, things become better. Things become better. Don't say this happened in spite of me, then you really write yourself off. The power of the individual has been so great, and it is even greater in our time. So the 50 years of independence, we are so proud, but we'll be more proud and happier if all of you realize, all of us realize our own responsibilities. Without claiming the privileges, let's go for the responsibilities and fulfill the responsibilities that the society has on us as educated people, and you will see other things will automatically follow. So I end this lecture with an expectation from all of you. Let it not be just another lecture that you will just forget in 5 minutes time, but take something from the lecture, particularly the last one. And so you will be hugely benefited, and then CI forum would be more meaningful to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was actually quite intense, I think. I think, Sharia, do you have some questions and comments in the chat box? So would you like to maybe read them out?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. So thank you so much, sir, for helping us to understand the different historical aspects regarding our country's literature, language, and culture. So if there are any questions from the students, please type it down in the chat box. And I believe there are some questions. Actually, one question is from me, actually, sir. So, sir, my question is, can we say that the Unnayan or independence is actually divided into multiple layers? For example, it is a free country for only the hierarchy men, a few, of course, but not for most of the female or the subalterns.
Yeah, that's what I said. If you have development, it's not say the infrastructures, the mega projects which tell you about development. It's about how if the woman from a village, if she can have the same space as a girl from the city, I believe that would be a signal that yes, we are going towards development. If healthcare is available even to the most disprivileged communities, as well as the privileged communities on an equal measure, then you can say we are progressing towards development. Development is not simply economic. GDP is just a few numbers, and statistics often lie. In fact, one definition of statistics is a bunch of lies put together to look as truth. But development is also a matter of your mental abilities to cope with change. If you do not change substantially, then no development will touch you. If, for example, a father is still not ready after even economic prosperity has given him the strength to let his daughters choose their own lives for themselves, that is not a development that we can expect. Because the man has got development in terms of his bank balance, but his mental frame remains still very colonial. Suppression of the rights of his girls, but boys are getting bigger, better privilege. So look at the micro level. I said development should not be looked at from macro level. Macro level development sometimes give you the lie. It's a micro level development. Look at the families. Is the maid who works in your family safe? If not, development, you have kept development out of her. And so you have no claim, no right to claim the development yourself. We have to begin from the micro stories. That's the reason why literature is so important, because it tells you stories. When I write stories, I look at the micro level of the story, so I get a better picture of society than most economists or sociologists, because they look at the bigger frame. The bigger frame is very attractive, yes, but the micro level stories, the stories of lives of the ordinary people, and if you say ordinary, you are in fact insulting the people. No one is ordinary. And that's the reason why Gramsci is important, isn't it? Gramsci says every individual is intellectual. Only society does not recognize their intellectual power. So if you think a rickshaw puller is intellectual because it negotiates the traffic of Dhaka after being insulted by the riders, denied the fees that he can claim, the wage he can claim for his pains, he is not given the wages he demands. So if this rickshaw puller is not safely transporting you, then why are you on his rickshaws then? The question is, he is an intellectual in his own game, except that you are not recognizing him. That recognition is withheld. And that's the problem with the development. Every player has a sense of responsibility. A team doesn't function without every player putting their best energy. Look at Bangladeshi cricket team failing every time because no one is ready to put 100% to it. If they do it 100%, they are not, their intellectuality is not coming into focus. It has been denied, suppressed by the fear that he has of confronting challenges. So development is meaningful if all the factors are taken into consideration. If the playing field is leveled and everyone has the same space, then you can say development has occurred. You are right, Shahriar. Thank you for raising the question.
Thank you so much, sir.
So I think one of the things is how complacent we become. We stop questioning when we are comfortable. So if I'm okay in my space, in my neighborhood or in my area, then I don't really think about what's happening out there unless it actually comes to me. So if we think about micro level adjustment and adaptation, change or questioning, then how do we deal with that complacency?
Exactly. You have to train your children to ask you questions. Your education system should train the children to ask questions. Our education system is fashioned in such a way that students are never asking questions to the teachers. Even in the university where everyone is supposed to be mature, and most university students dream of becoming BCS officers, right? I'm not blaming them because that's the one job they can get without greasing somebody's palms or claiming somebody to their influential khalu to sort of anyway. What happens is the children are never taught in a family to ask questions or challenge the parents. Students never challenge their teachers. So this compliance factor is so strong a disincentive to develop your personality. We do not operate at the level of personality development, which is expected of every individual. Psychologists tell us that. For a child, for example, at age 5, can expose himself or herself to 2 languages and can pick up a thoroughly bilingual craftsmanship. But in our country, we have decided that only one language should be taught, and that one language you do not teach in the best possible way. If you cannot articulate yourself in your mother language, how can you have your rights? How can you tell your stories? So if you look at all the systems, and when children are employed in labor against their wish, denying them the freedom to choose, then you cannot develop a nation. Onindo has asked me a question: is it a lack of leadership? The question is, leaders are not people who are supposed to guide you. Leaders have to be created by the community. It is a Latin word, what's that, Kaiser? Um, the best among the equals, primus, uh, I mean, inter pares, right? Primus inter pares, the equal among others, the best among the equals. So leadership is not hierarchy. It is the best among the equals. So if you are equal in every sense of the term, one would always be able to lead you. But if you lag behind the leader, then he becomes a super person, really, Superman. Super person, Superman cannot solve the problems of a community. And it only happens, as in Superman films, in imagination and fantasy. A real leader is born from the community inside. Now, surprisingly, Syed has an insight, gives you an insight about leadership. আমরা ছোটবেলা শুনতাম, আমাদেরকে এক শিক্ষক বলতেন যে যেমন গরু তেমন রাখাল। উনি আবার আমাদের উদাহরণ দিয়ে আমেরিকা গিয়েছিলেন তিনি। তিনি বলতেন যে আমেরিকাতে গরুগুলি এত তাজা যে রাখালকে ঘোড়ায় চড়ে সবসময় ধরতে হয়। আমাদের শিখিয়েছিলেন there is something called one cow or a bull becomes a maverick. ওটা পাল ছেড়ে দৌড় দিবেই, পালের সঙ্গে থাকবে না, ম্যাভারিক। তো ওটাকে ধরার জন্য লেসো ছুঁড়ে ছুঁড়ে কাউবয়রা দিন রাত পরিশ্রম করে সন্ধ্যার সময় ফিরেছে তারা পাগলের মতো। আর আমাদের ওখানে ফুলের উপর ঘুমিয়ে পড়ে, ফুলের মধু খেয়ে বাঁশি বাজাতে বাজাতে আর গরুরা চড়ে বেড়ায়, নির্জীব গরু। তো লিডারশিপ ইজ নট that kind of an activity in which you are leading a gang of people who do not know what to do. Leaders have to gather their strength from the communities. So Anindo, don't look at the leaders. Ask yourself, have you prepared the ground for a leader to emerge? Are you that leader? The best community is where everyone has leadership qualities, so by consensus one leads for a time. And that the leadership changes. It's not changing of the baton, one generation passes, another comes, but also by consensus, 2 years later, the leader changes and he is or she is equally happy to give over leadership to somebody who has by the time become much better leader than him or her, because he or she has learned the newest technologies of leadership. So develop the technologies of leadership within yourself, within communities, and then you can see leaders are emerging. I taught a class of MBA class in Brack University for 14 years. It was called the managerial communication. Leadership was very important in there. Leadership quality in business is fundamental to the growth of a leader, of a community. Who is the best corporate leader? Who first functions as a team member and as a team member excels in performing all the responsibilities. So somebody who does his 100% plus does something or willing to do something plus, he is or she is a leader in a corporate community. So leaders are not born. That's wrong. Leaders grow from the strength of the community. And the community's acceptance of the leader is in proportion to the things that he or she delivers. He or she delivers with your consent. And you are preparing the leader, basically, is important. So I cannot read many of the chats coming to my screen because they are fleeting so much. They come with a shelf life of 1.5 seconds. I cannot read so fast. Arif, I'm sure you have seen many of the comments, right?
Yes, sir. Would you like me to read them out?
You can read one or two, but we are finishing at 8 o'clock, right?
Yes, sir. We'll finish up in a minute.
I can also read one of them. Let's see.
Sharia, do you have access? আমি আসলে ইয়ে করতে পারছি না।
Yeah, sure, ma'am. So let me just read there is actually two questions basically. One is from Sanjida Alam. She commented, "Sir, we are the only nation that has given blood for our mother language, and yes, got the freedom. But sir, nowadays only knowing Bangla is not enough. For example, in job sector, people expect you to know English. Sir, can we say that we are somehow still not fully independent? We are still following the theme of colonization in our dress up, in our food habit, and in our education as well?"
Well, food habits change. I mean, if you believe that you are a traditionalist, then you will be, in fact, out of sync with the modern times. Things change, and we have to accept change. One of the fundamental rules of a society is to accept change and then adjust the change within the system that you have developed. So just eating another foreign food doesn't make you dependent on it. The question is, if that food has come to your country by erasing your local food systems, then it's dangerous. Similarly, Western fashion is not by itself wrong. All of us are wearing Western dresses today in this. This was not the dress our forefathers wore. Change is inevitable. Important thing to remember is whether the change is adjusted to your own systems. We are very comfortable with the shirt that I'm wearing, so this is a modern dress for us. If I have to wear a pair of suits, I don't wear suits, but people have to wear that, well, wear it. But don't forget your own dresses. Kaisar Haq is a case in point. He is a great champion of lungi. And lungi is a metaphor of everything traditional. It's very wrong that learning English will make us dependent on the West. Rather, not learning English will make you dependent on the West. There's the trap. If you know English like you know your own mother language, you can argue with them. You can read the fine prints in any international treaty. You can be counted as an equal because they will know that you have the power of your own language as well as you know English as well as them. It gives you an added advantage. What is wrong with that? And if you can learn your own mother language, you can learn any language possible. I went to a Bangla medium school. Our teachers always told us to learn English as good as we could, because this will empower you to negotiate a difficult world. It's not the job market alone that welcomes English. Our players in New Zealand, if they knew English as good as Bangla, they could have talked to the local coaches and other players. They'd have the kind of drive to raise their own flag. They would not be dependent on an interpreter. See, the problem is we do not teach our own language properly. That's the problem. We do not develop expertise in our mother language. How can you develop expertise in another country? If you cannot speak in your own language in an uninterrupted manner, fluently and eloquently and in a very articulate fashion, what's the use of learning another language? So you have to think about it. Someone from Jahangirnagar University has given a very important question, but this is a very political question nowadays. Unnayan is not a myth. Please don't politicize my lecture. I did not say Unnayan is a myth. It cannot be a myth. It's true that we have got development. You cannot deny that. You go to a village, I went to a village 50 years ago. Most people did not have two sets of dresses. Children below 10 were all naked. They didn't have the dress to cover them up. You do not see this problem then. You have roads, you have connectivities, but what I suggested, you possibly missed my lecture. It's not the infrastructure development that is most important. It's not the development which happens in the macro level that is important. What happens is development all around. Has your mind developed? If you are asking a question from a political angle, then your mind has not developed. You do not have the catholicity of your mind, the broadness of sensibilities, in which to accommodate divergent ideas together. I can be a critique of a system, but I can also take the best out of the system. I cannot really sweep everything with the idea that I know better than others. So please don't fall into the trap. It is what the rhetoric of a particular party or the opposition of the government is floating, that it's a myth. It is not a myth. It's a reality. Unnayan has happened. Podda Bridge is a definite Unnayan. But what you have to be aware of, under the light of this Unnayan, the darkness which is called disparity, it is increasing. There we should be more focused. Everyone should be brought into the system of governance where each one's healthcare is safeguarded, each one's education is the most beautiful one you can give, each one gets the rights and privileges, each one is treated equally. If you can ensure that, development becomes meaningful. That's what I mean, right? Putting out fancy lights, I don't agree with you, absolutely not. I do not look at Unnayan in a physical sense of the term. Physical Unnayan can be done by anyone, anytime if you want, if you have the money. I gave an example of a family. A father is very rich. I know the family. The father is very rich. He has fancy lights, if it is flights or metaphors, everywhere. He has a big SUV he drives, but his two daughters are denied the freedom to choose their lives. They are not allowed to study science. That is not Unnayan. What I mean is, this person doesn't have the strength of his mind to believe his daughters. If you believe your daughters, you will never be cheated. You will never lose anything. That is Unnayan, when everyone is included in the same frame. So I am not talking about, I'm not disparaging the whole idea of Unnayan, but I'm just giving you more important ground of development, which is the development of the soft material, is a software development. The software is your mind. Have we prepared our children to be able to understand themselves, take charge of their own future, to be dispenser of truth and justice, to listen to their own conscience? Have we given them, as Arifa has beautifully, a question is very important here. It's in fact basically a comment, that have we really empowered our children to ask questions? If you do not ask questions, remember, modernism is defined as a movement which began with a series of questions. Who am I? Individual, society, community, the country, expanding waves, circles of identity. And if you can place yourself at the center of this kind of development of concentric circles, beginning with the individual, ending with the state, then you have achieved the impossible. Development for only the privileged few is not development. That's what I mean. Development of the software, your mind, through education, culture, this is the most important thing. If you neglect culture, then you end up with only the concrete jungle that is called development. That's what I mean. Okay. Yeah, somebody says asking questions seems to be disrespect. Aisha, so yeah, it's not a disrespect. Depends on your attitude when you are asking question. Sometimes the person who asks question doesn't know what it means to ask a question. It is not to destroy somebody. I remember one critic who didn't like me for some reason, sitting on the edge of a chair when I was finishing my lecture, just to ask me questions which were nothing to do with the lecture I gave, but just to make me very uncomfortable and derive some kind of pleasure from it. Fortunately, I could foresee what was coming and prepare myself. That kind of question shows disrespect. but respect is all around. If I respect you, you respect me. Aisha, I believe every teacher should respect students. That's why the first thing I do in my class, in real face-to-face classes, ask you to prepare a set of questions. It is not a disrespect, it's just only filling the gaps that we have. Shamshad will agree, Arifa will agree. Teachers don't know everything. We sometimes pretend we know because we do not have much time in our hands, 1 hour and 50 minutes to give a lecture, so we cannot really veer off. But the more you ask a question, the more you strike a balance in the participatory nature of education. If you are an equal partner, then what we learn is much better because your contribution adds to my contribution. If you sit silently, don't ask me question, you do not energize me and you do not really empower me to go beyond the frame that I have chased. Today's questions have been very interesting. Okay.
Sir, Mohittin has a very interesting question about the relationship between nationalism and retaining indigenous culture.
True.
So, yeah.
Yeah, nationalism, Rabindranath Tagore is one of the greatest writers you'll probably read to understand what nationalism is. Benedict Anderson and others, we had a seminar, Shamshad, remember, on nationalism? Um, Nationalism in the Western sense is something that is a centralized power in which certain ethnicity is promoted over the others. The best form of nationalism is inclusive nationalism, in which everyone has a space. But that becomes very rhetorical as long as the system does not have safety checks within itself or built-in balances which will offset any particular community claiming more ground. Nationalism has an ideal phase which does not operate in any country in the world. Forget about it. It is always the majority, as I used to phrase, majoritarian ethics which prevails in nationalism. And nationalism is restrictive because it doesn't include everyone in the same frame. Nationalism promotes ideologies, and ideologies, remember, are never innocent. Ideologies come with a politicization of certain ideas within a system of articulation. That's nationalism is also an articulation of the majoritarian ethics. And Rabindranath has a very good example. When the nation state has not emerged, the Middle Ages, for example, the Renaissance, for example, where nationalism was beginning to take a modern form, Rabindranath found nationalism as a torch which was lighting up areas of darkness. And with the First World War raging, he gave lectures in America and Japan. It became very unpopular there in both countries. He said, nationalism is like a torch which is now setting fire to your neighbors' homes. See the torch, like the scalpel the doctor uses and a knife that a butcher uses. The torch which earlier nationalism carried, the kind of nations of communities of equals people, lighted the torch of knowledge. So there were give and take between nations in terms of knowledge and epistemological culture. But the nation of later times, Enlightenment onwards, when solidified around the idea of nations, then it became a torch which set fire to the neighbors' homes. So the question whether ethnic minorities are included in the nation, no, their houses are torched by the same majoritarian nationalism. But we have an alternative nationalism, which is a cultural one, not a political one. It's called Bangaliana. Now, Bangaliana jeta is the whole essence of being a Bengali. And the essence of Bengali is, Rabindranath has mentioned these. The Bharat Tirthe তিনি ভারতের এসেন্সটা এইভাবে ব্যাখ্যা করেছেন, দিবে আর নেবে, মিলাবে, যাবে না ফিরে। তো আমরা যদি এই ন্যাশনালিজম প্র্যাকটিস করি, যেখানে প্রত্যেকটা এথনিক মাইনরিটি যাবে আর দেবে আর নিবে, মেলাবে মিলিবে, যাবে না ফিরে, that kind of a mosaic in which every inch of picture is important for its integrity. If a mosaic picture has to be integral, it should include all the different shades of color and the designs that are available. That's nationalism. That's a cultural nationalism which can because cultures don't really like to have quarrels with another culture. Cultures by nature have conversations with each other, not quarrels. Whereas political nationalism is full of these quarrels and ego trips. That is not what really is something that you must look at. So please remember, your nationalism is important, but it should not be an exclusive privilege that you have. It should be inclusive. It should include everyone. In your house, do you practice that inclusivity? If your maid doesn't have the same voice, then you are not practicing inclusivity. How can you expect your nationalism to develop if you do not contribute to it? My lecture has one important theme. Don't look at the history of the 50 years from an outsider's point of view. Look at it from insider's point of view. You'll have two advantages. One, you will judge others as you judge yourself. You will judge everything that is going around, Unnayan otherwise, just as things that are happening, as well as what can be the alternative. And the alternatives have to be uh, brought to the front so that you have a balance achieved. That balance, like the mosaic picture, is where every piece is equally important. So you are not weighing one piece separately as existing in a vacuum, another piece existing in another vacuum. No, you never exist in a vacuum. Nationalism should not be something that exists in a vacuum. It should be full of people, and people means culture. So the frame should be cultural, not political. Political nationalisms have come and gone. As a school child, I was taught Pakistani nationalism. I didn't know what that was. It's kind of a ephemera. It was, I don't know what it was, basically. And the Pakistanis don't know what this is. Or the whole idea of Indian nationalism. You ask an Oriya or a South Indian, they will not be able to understand what is Indian nationalism. It's a mosaic where every community should be important. But is every community important as the other important community? You will never have a perfect nationalism if you only take the political view. But if you broaden your cultural references, and then you'll have a cultural nationalism, which can be very accommodative of differences, othernesses, and be happy to adjust to others' needs. And the moment you adjust to others' needs, you in fact grow in strength, not in get let down in weakness. That's the most important thing. Okay, maybe that's the last question.
So I think we have one question from Tawassum ma'am.
Oh, Tabassum has a question. Okay.
So the question is, how do we transfer the 50 years of independence into a positive force and fight the right battle instead of losing ourselves in mere rhetoric?
No, if you have noticed in my lecture, I use plenty of rhetoric, but underlying the rhetoric had been a hard-nosed approach to the reality. Tabassum, there's two things I tell you. Look at the history and look at how much you have included yourself into the history. If you believe you are an outsider, that history will pass you by. So the number one question, have you taken the stake? Have you been a stakeholder enough to claim the history as your own and then done the adjustments? The second thing, learning from the history, are we ready ourselves? I'm not talking of the nation as a whole, but begin from ourselves. Are we ready to go forward and apply the lessons that we have learned and expect changes to happen? Begin from our own personal, very sort of microcosmic spheres. Are we ready to go forward with the changes that we have understood necessary to take us forward? If not, that becomes a rhetorical undertaking once again. Plenty of people talk about what is the government doing. The question is, what are you doing? What the government doing is a rhetorical question which will be answered in a rhetorical way. All the government is doing this, it is giving you vaccines, the government is doing that. It is making your life easier because we have $44 billion dollar in Bangladesh bank vaults. So these are the rhetorical answers ready when rhetorical questions are asked. But if you ask yourself the question, have I been responsible for change within my family? Are women respected in my family? Is difference respected in my family? Have I given over to the power of rhetoric to decide my fate, as if, oh, আমি তাদেরকে তো স্বাধীনতা দিচ্ছি কিন্তু তারা তো নিতে জানে না. That's a rhetoric we have decided. না, আমি তো ওই কাজের বাচ্চাটাকে স্কুলে পাঠালাম, ও স্কুলটা ঠিক বুঝে না. That's a rhetoric which just sweeps away the hard reality that any child can be a good learner. Have we ever tried? So me included in the frame. It's not the students or Tabassum, you or we all practice rhetoric every day. Because this is an academic exercise, I can be free from the rhetorics that I do in talk shows, for example. My talk show discussions are increasingly becoming rhetorical because questions are rhetorical. But hard-nosed reality tells you that we must begin the changes which are so overdue. Are we fighting for the rights of our community sincerely? If not, then I don't think if rights will ever translate into reality. Tabassum, because your question is very difficult, I cannot answer in 2 or 3 minutes. It itself needs a 50-minute discussion. Maybe some other day we'll have a discussion on this particular point, rhetorics versus reality. Mahmoud, there is a topic.
Yeah, and also the postmodern twist, like, what is positive and what is right.
Yeah, okay. What is real and what is not real.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mahmoud?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. It was amazing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. So we have now come to the end of the second forum of the CI program. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Mahmood Hasan Khan, Associate Professor DEH and the convener of the Spring 2021 CI program, to deliver his vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shahryar. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Syed Manzoorul Islam for accepting our request to give today's forum lecture on curriculum integration. It was our pleasure to have Manzoor sir with us tonight to theorize Bangladesh as a post-colonial nation, and particularly the country after 50 years of its independence. Sir talked about postal theories, including subaltern historiography, environmental politics, and Foucauldian notion of power. Sir has also talked about the villages disappearing and how would then the displaced population around the globe, including Bangladesh, would interpret their relation with the space they inhabit. If I may add here, David Harvey has written on neoliberalism and geographical space, spatial politics. Bourdieu's concept of habitus can be of help here too, which our students can explore further. Manzoor sir has concluded by reflecting on decolonizing our mind, decolonization of mind. So thank you, sir, for this speech, and I think our students have taken a lot from this, and they will definitely come up with more questions in your class and in other classes as well. We're truly thankful to our Pro-Vice Chancellor and the Honorable Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, Professor Dr. Shamshat Murtaza, for always supporting us in organizing events where our students get an opportunity to engage with academics and experts critically and creatively. Also thanking Professor Kaiser Haq, our previous dean, to be here today with us. I would also like to thank our head of the department, Associate Professor Ms. Arifa Rahman, for her support and explaining what students should do in the very beginning of the program. Ms. Naza Farhad, Senior Lecturer at DEH, she has designed the layout of the CI program this semester, liaised with everyone, and made sure that the event has taken place successfully. Thank you, Naza. Naza was supported by our colleague Tasmia Mayan. I thank our event organizing team. In the team, there are Dr. Syed, Farzana Sultana, Tanzia, Samiha, and Nahian. Our host today, Fahim Shahryar, our teaching assistant, for publicity materials, Mashur Rahman, the IT officials for maintaining the online platform smoothly, our colleagues, and last but not the least, our students. Thank you very much for your kind participation in this forum. Thank you, everyone.